Chinese Taoist culture has a long history, has a history of thousands of years, and the masters emerge and endlessly, and slowly the years become a river in which there are many records about the Tao, or annihilated in the dust of history, or wandered in the folk countryside. Taoism, once a glorious place, has now become a tourist and cultural attraction. There is such a Taoist priest. His life is legendary. It's also tortuous, more helpless. He has saved many lives. Among them is me, including my aunt. Here's what I'll tell you next. The Last Taoist Priest, Zhao Wenbin's life. By a little story. Elicit out a person. Slag is a rare surname. This is recorded in the 100 family names. The Slag surname is one of the Chinese surnames. It ranks 397th among the 100 surnames. One is from the Jiang family. Descendants of Emperor Yin. The son of the Qing palace of the Spring and Autumn Qi state was sealed to the scum. Descendants take the feudal descendant as their surname. It is called a scum surname. Later, the scum was removed from the wood. Became a scumbag surname. The second is from the surname Mi. In the spring and autumn period, the doctor of the Duke of Chu was sealed in Zai. Descendants take the name of the righteous place as the surname. There is a village called Red Village in the mountainous area of Zheshi. There is a family surnamed Su in the village. The man in charge of the house is a wooden family. Do a good carpentry job. Known as Su Luban. The ancestors often did it for a living. It is to make coffins for other people's homes. To his generation, naturally, he inherited the family business. Although there is a good craft. But it's a dead man's business. There are few ordinary women able to look at him. After several twists and turns, the Tomei people finally married a daughter-in-law in a neighboring village. It was back in those days. There is one thing that is underdeveloped. It's pregnancy. 10 years. They had 3 daughters and 2 boys. There are a lot of people in this house. The expenses are large. The husband and wife discussed. The daughter-in-law went for a ligation. Yes. Who is Su Luban? It's my grandfather. Another decade passed. Unexpectedly, Grandma was pregnant again. Grandpa didn't know. It's joy or sorrow. This daughter-in-law has obviously had a ligation. Why can you still conceive a child? Oops, my belly is getting bigger day by day. In October, the pregnant chipmunk fell. Grandpa didn't expect it either. 40 years old himself. I was able to have a daughter. She gave this youngest daughter. The name is Xiao. That is, my sister-in-law. It was 1977. Naturally, my grandfather was very happy to have a daughter. On the day of the full moon of the daughter, a feast was held. The neighbors in the village also came to drink. It's a time of festivities. In front of the Su family, there was a man dressed in a tattered robe. A Taoist priest carrying a gossip bag. And the man who had done good things stopped the priest. Came up with the idea that this master's family had just won 1,000 gold. Let this Taoist priest count it. Look at the fate. The Taoist priest was also refreshed. Come and take a look. A little baby in the wall fort. Immediately pinch your fingers and count. Suddenly shocked. Took this male master Su Luban. Called into the inner witch. Whispered. Host, you've got a lot of money. It would have been a gratifying thing. But there is a saying in the trail. I don't know if I should talk about it today. My grandfather was a carpenter, but it's also very reasonable, said with a smile. You Taoist. If you have something to say, just say it. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad. The table was open in a moment. Have a glass of wine. The Taoist priest glanced at the void road patch, said, Your little daughter is beautiful, but I'm afraid it won't be easy to feed in the future. When my grandfather heard this, he was anxious. Just got a daughter. You don't know where you came from. It's just nonsense here. Say such bad things. So he went up and pushed the Taoist priest. You Taoist priest is not Taiwanese. How can you talk nonsense like that? This Taoist priest was already dressed in tatters, was pushed by Su Luban like this. I even tore my clothes. A copper bump fell out of his arms, rolled to the ground. The shouting inside. I was shocked by my grandmother, who was waiting in the room. Come and have a look. A ragged Taoist priest. I'm entangled with my own man. He went up and separated the two. Listen to my mom. Grandma is really a character. First scolded my grandfather for his rudeness without asking the reason. Then he apologized to the Taoist priest. He took out a needle and thread and sewed up his clothes. Say anything, leave someone for a meal. The Taoist priest couldn't shirk it, and he sat down with all the people. A few glasses of wine. His face turned red. Start blowing. He is the head of Mao Shan. Countdown. Don't want to. But he drank the ice shell and laughed. I don't know if the Taoist priest drank too much, or whatever. During the banquet, everyone asked again. The life of this baby. He even said again. This little girl doll is short-lived. It's hard to feed. I'm afraid that there will be difficulties in the future. When everyone heard this, they thought, you, a Taoist priest, dare to speak wildly. Especially my grandfather, the head of the fire that has just been pressed down. It rubbed and jumped up again. He ran into the house. Take out an axe and cut it down. Fortunately, he was stopped by everyone, and he scolded there. Grandma really listened to it this time. I can't help but hang my face. He shouted at the Taoist priest. Where did the wild Taoist priest come from? I am kind enough to entertain you. You go and curse my daughter like this. Hurry up and get out of here. Don't want to. The Taoist priest was insulted like this. But it's not annoying. Touched his chest. I looked at the sky again, glancing at everyone. Said, don't be angry. The trail is also telling the truth. You female doll. I'm afraid I won't live to be 9 years old. If the Taoist priest is in trouble, you can come to the house in Anshin County to find me. After speaking, he sat down in front of everyone. Turn around and go. Only the guests were left with a face-to-face promise. And his grandfather's family were so angry that they snorted. Although everyone advised not to take it seriously, but in the heart of my grandmother, who is already a little superstitious, still left a shadow. In the blink of an eye, 9 years later, my aunt is not only healthy and smart, and it's beautiful, especially a pair of big watery eyes. It's very pleasing to adults. Slowly grandmother's family. For what I said 9 years ago, and gradually forgotten. There are quite a few dead people in the countryside. It's going to be a big funeral. This is also known as funeral. The whole village had to go over and help with the funeral. Everyone is also going to drink heavily, eat meat in large chunks. It's not lively, but there must be a dish. It's something that every family has. It's just a serving of white tofu. Therefore, the white wedding event is also called eating tofu rice. Summer 1986. That was the day I was born. An old man died in the Red Village. In that era of relative material scarcity, there was a white happy event. It means that you can make a tooth mark. My grandfather and grandmother took my aunt to eat tofu rice. During the banquet, the aunt also ate a lot of oil and water. The feast is over. A family of 3 hurried home while the stars were shining in the sky. The family was 2 miles away from my grandmother's house. There is a reservoir on the road to Beijing, 300 meters long. When I was a kid, I used to sneak away to swim in that reservoir. Every time, I was caught by my grandmother and beaten up. I don't say why. There was no one to live on that stretch of road. It's only about 10 minutes to walk these 2 miles. Besides, this road is usually walked. The moon and stars were especially bright that night. The path that was illuminated was white. There is no need for a flashlight to illuminate it all. There is one thing in the countryside in the summer. always attracts the little ones. That's the firefly. The ant is chasing the fireflies in front of her, laughing while chasing. The bugs flickered and flew forward. My aunt ran after her. The grandfather and grandmother in the back are not far away. He looked at the child with a smile. Grandpa said to Grandma while smoking a sweat cigarette, "Who said that my daughter is not easy to raise? The child was born by beating himself. I haven't even had a minor illness. I think that Taoist priest is a charlatan." It didn't take long for me to get home. My aunt was originally a child. I slept with my grandparents. When you grow up, arranged for her to sleep with her third sister. My aunt and uncle and my mother are already married. There are only the third aunt and the little aunt left, and a brother-in-law is still at home. Before going to bed, the aunt said to the third aunt, "Eat the good things you like to eat today." Aroused the envy of the third aunt. Ever since the arrival of this sister, Grandpa's house is a bit good. It's all left to the aunt as much as possible. Take, for example, eating corn. What my aunt gets is always the one on the head. What did the third aunt eat? Always a half cut on the tail. But my aunt is really cute. The third aunt washed her feet, so he carried her to the bed. In the company of the third aunt, the aunt quickly fell asleep. Until an exclamation in the middle of the night scratched the Sue family. Life has been quiet for 9 years. It was none other than the one who made this exclamation. It was the third aunt who was already asleep. Before the aunt fell asleep, everything is normal. In the second half of the night, the third aunt heard the sound of Sue getting up in a daze. She thought it was a show that was going to get up late. This kid doesn't pee at night on weekdays. Why did you get up tonight? With the help of the moonlight outside the window, she saw 9-year-old Shio get out of bed. She thought her sister was just getting up to pee. So I didn't care. So he turned around and went back to sleep. After about a cigarette, the third aunt was suddenly awakened because she didn't feel the movement of her sister back to the bed. So she turned her head to see. It doesn't matter if you turn your head. The third aunt saw the most terrifying scene in her life. The younger sister in front of the window knelt at the moon outside the window. A shudder woke up the third aunt, who was still a little confused. She straightened her clothes, deliberately brazen, and coughed. No response. The third aunt has been very timid since she was a child. A single mouse can scare her half to death. The third aunt shouted softly to the aunt, "Laugh." But the kneeling sister still didn't react in the slightest. The third aunt shouted loudly again, "Laugh. What's wrong with you?" My sister still didn't respond. She hurried out of bed. "I can't even take care of my shoes. Go down to see my sister." The third aunt was barefoot, a few steps towards his kneeling sister. He pressed his hand on her back. "I want to turn my sister around, only to find out. A younger sister who usually has no abdominal muscles. She didn't turn it." By the moonlight, the third aunt went around to the front to take a look. She saw the most unforgettable images of her life. Guiji's sister chews on the white candle she lights in her mouth. At that time, there was often no electricity in the countryside, so people always have to use candles instead of electric lights. And I don't want to use it. At this moment, the aunt is chewing a candle in her mouth, and her face is bloodless. The eyes are glazed and unfocused, motionless looking at the moon. The third aunt was so frightened that she let out the biggest scream in her life. This call woke up the grandparents and the uncle, who had not yet started a family. also woke up the catastrophe that my aunt was calculated when she was born. When my grandfather ran to their room with my aunt in his clothes, the third aunt was speechless. The moment you turn on the light, my aunt had fainted on the ground. Next to the candle, the bite marks are clearly visible. When my grandfather picked up my aunt, look at her face and the candle in her mouth. I was also shocked. The whole family shifted their gaze to the third aunt who fell to the ground. Grandma pulled up the third aunt. "What's going on? What's wrong with your sister?" The third aunt was completely frightened and speechless at that time. Only the body that kept shaking and the teeth that stood there. Tell the crowd. It was as if she had seen a terrible scene. Grandpa picked up his aunt, who was already unconscious, and put her on the bed. Grandma hugged the trembling third aunt, the little black dog that the 12-year-old uncle was holding in his hand. After entering this house, he began to fly wildly, screaming incessantly. It's a bit of a madness. Grandma impatiently asked her brother-in-law to take the dog out. Just after that dog went out, and called out at the door, "Just don't come in." Grandma may have been a little annoyed by the call too, so he yelled at the dog. I screamed, "And you will be slaughtered by the slaughter." It's strange to say, after a loud drink, the black dog actually scared out to pee. Then he ran back to the kennel with his tail between his legs. After a while, the third aunt, who gradually calmed down, told her grandparents about the scene she saw. I heard my grandparents and grandparents so much that their hairs stood on end. After the third aunt finished speaking, she couldn't help but start crying again, but his grandmother covered his mouth. "Don't cry." The third aunt could only endure her fear, grunt and snort. It wasn't long before that, my aunt began to move in a daze. Then I started throwing up, vomiting. The spitting out was mixed with a fishy smell. There are also dinners that are already in a semi-digested state. It's really colorful. Be proud. Grandma actually knows a little bit of local medicine. It can't be done at that late. I burned cuting tea for my aunt to drink. I also drank this cuting tea at my grandmother's house when I was a child. It is very effective in treating children with bad stomach. Specifically, the outer layer of skin of the chicken bricks is dried, plus tea leaves are roasted on an iron plate. After burning, grind and rinse and drink, I can remove chicken food from children. It is said to have the effect of an exorcist to aid digestion. It really works. Grandma poured cuting tea for my aunt, according to the cornerstone spitting method. The aunt clenched her teeth. Anyway, I just can't pour it. The little that was occasionally poured down was also spit out by her. In the end, it can't be helped. Grandma asked Grandpa to pinch open my aunt's mouth. Let the uncle hold down his kicking foot. Forcibly poured him a lot. After pouring this bitter tea, my aunt was quiet for a while. It's just that the third aunt doesn't dare to sleep anymore. And so, my grandfather and grandmother stayed in my aunt's room. Sleep with my aunt. Let the third aunt and the little uncle go to their room to sleep. At this time, the aunt was already a little sober. After a while, I didn't throw up. Started to have diarrhea again. And so on until dawn. Early the next morning, he was sent to the town's health center. The people at the health center took a look, said that he was afraid that he would eat it badly, follow acute gastroenteritis, give my aunt a drip. The nurse had just inserted the needle into my aunt's arm, was pulled by my aunt. She refused to cooperate with the doctor's treatment. In the end, the doctor couldn't help it. It should be injected with a buttocks needle. She also needs her grandfather to hold her tightly. Don't let my aunt mess with her. It took a long time to toss like this. My aunt still kept spitting bitter water. The doctor at the town health center advised my grandmother to send her to a county hospital with better medical conditions. At noon that day, my grandparents took my brother-in-law and aunt to the county seat. After getting to the car, I got motion sickness. So my grandmother hugged my aunt and sat down by the window. At that time, the bus was very tight. There were a lot of people crowded outside to get on the bus, including my brother-in-law and grandfather. Grandma pulled the window to breathe. Suddenly, my aunt stepped out of the window. I happened to be caught by my grandfather outside in a hurry. The aunt cried and shouted, "Don't take me there. I'm going to die. You take me home." Let my grandfather coax him. My aunt just kept crying. Refused to get into the car. She was only 9 years old that year. This sentence was said by my aunt. My uncle told me later. Because she was there. But my aunt told me. She doesn't remember anything anymore. I only vaguely remember when I was a child. I had a serious illness. Nothing else is clear. Say yes. Pick up my aunt's grandfather outside. Stuffed my aunt into the car through the window again. Grandma can hold my aunt tight this time. Hold her firmly. Ignore her cries. The car was carrying a family. Drive slowly towards the county seat. Arrived at the county hospital, holding a letter of introduction from the town hospital. The hospital immediately arranged for my aunt to be hospitalized. The doctor examined it. At first, it was treated in the same way as eating something bad. During treatment, my aunt ran out of the hospital more than once while adults were not paying attention. In the end, there was really no way around. Grandma ruthlessly tied her aunt with a strip of cloth. I didn't dare to sleep. Several people took turns looking at her. Even go to the toilet. It is also solved in the ward. Where do you dare to let her out? 1986 year. At that time, the living conditions of everyone were generally not good. The hospital also eats canteens. At first, my aunt called my grandmother from the cafeteria. Either knock it over or don't eat a bite. It's all sustained by nutrient solutions. It was about the third day of hospitalization. At noon that day, my grandmother went to the cafeteria to knock it over. The food that came from everyone tasted it for half a lifetime. The rice was not cooked. It is also commonly known as home-cooked rice. Oddly enough, this time, the bowl of domestic rice in front of my aunt. But it made my aunt drool. For the first time, she said she wanted to eat. Grandma was surprised to untie the strip of cloth for her. My aunt swallowed a bowl of half-raw rice in a few bites. And yelling for food. As a result, grandparents, the second aunt, and the uncle's domestic rice. They were all eaten by my aunt alone. The belly is bulging, but she clamored for more. It scared the hell out of the family. Grandma hurried over to find a doctor. The doctor took a look. This kid has become like this. Where can I eat again? Even the infusion tube was pulled out. I fed some vanishing tablets and walked away. Dinner time. The rice is normal. My aunt started to stop eating again. I thought she had eaten too much at noon. But the next day, the third day, no matter how good the meal is, put it in front of my aunt. She didn't even open her mouth. Such a situation. It lasted until the evening of the fourth day. That night, my aunt still didn't eat. Looking at the emaciating aunt, Grandma had tears in her eyes. It hurts to death. No matter how much you coax, it doesn't work. Helplessly, go straight down. My grandmother went out and spent money to buy a meal for the family. Give it to my aunt. The results were unsurprising. My aunt ate a fine light again. Eat until your stomach bulges again. Doctors can't explain this situation. It's just that Master Ding can't give him this kind of home-cooked food. A child's stomach is not good. This kind of food is easy to aggravate the condition. 2 days after that, the family didn't dare to give her any more domestic food. The doctor couldn't do anything about my aunt. It lasted until the 7th day. My aunt suddenly fainted again and began to convulsions and foaming at the mouth. Both heartbeat and blood pressure began to drop. The doctor said, "Let's prepare for the future. I'm afraid this kid won't be able to save it. I don't know what the disease is." At that time, my grandmother was very strong. She didn't cry either. Just one sentence. "If you want to die, you can't die in a hospital. Anyway, and bring it home." Saying that, he called a taxi overnight. I pulled it back to my hometown. On the way back, Grandma remembered the Taoist priest back then. Let my grandfather go to him again. But that was 9 years ago. A Taoist priest passing by here. There was no telephone at that time. I don't have a business card. Vast sea of people. Where to start? Grandma recalled. The Taoist priest once mentioned a place. Anshin Wulapu. Hurriedly dismantled my grandfather. Ride your bike. Grandpa asked people all the way in a hurry. Finally in a small town. I inquired about the place. Wait until you arrive at Wulapu. It's also dark. When he saw someone, he inquired, "Is there a Taoist priest here?" After several inquiries, finally got some eyebrows. An old man. Pointing to my grandfather, he said, "Wulapu to the west. There is a small village. It's very remote though. You have to pass through a chestnut forest. Below is the cemetery. Over the cemetery, walk another 5 miles. It was previously said, there was a Taoist priest. As for the surname Shin name, I don't know." Grandpa thanked the old man. Take advantage of the moonlight to rush the night. Passing by the chestnut forest. I don't know, it's a firefly. It's still a piece of ghost fire. Frightened, he pedaled the pedals desperately. I accidentally fell and fell hard. I didn't bother to check when I got up. Gritted his teeth and hurried forward. Wait until that little village. I was already sweating profusely in pain. Sitting at the entrance of the village and checking it. Even the bones are to be seen. Grandpa loves this little daughter very much. It's also in a hurry. He crouched on the side of the road and began to cry. Just when my grandfather was crying, in a broken grass house at the entrance of the village, out came a young man. Thick eyebrows and big eyes. The bridge of the nose is towering, dressed in a white robe. A group of avant-garde drums. When I caught up, I asked my grandfather what was going on. Grandpa is really an acute person. It's like a stranger with a bamboo tube fight. That's it. After listening to my grandfather's story, the young man said, "Big brother, don't worry. You come into the house with me first. Take your time. I'll bandage you." As he spoke, he led my grandfather into the house. After entering, Grandpa saw inside this inconspicuous hut. On the walls hang portraits of the Taoist Sanqing. I want to clear the primordial Tianzuan. Shangqing Lingbao Tianzuan. Taiqing Dao Tianzuan. The man made a cup of tea for his grandfather. The showman sat down. Look at my grandfather's wounds. One is optimistic about the big one. Even his pants were torn. What about blood? Soaked the fabric. Then he went into the house and took the herbs. Apply a compress to the wound first, then wrap it in a white cloth. Stop the bleeding for the time being. However, my grandfather was still in pain. Bandaged, the man got up again and made his grandfather a cup of tea. Tea looks good. Ordinary. It's strange for my grandfather to drink it in one gulp. The inner turmoil gradually calmed down. What about wounds? It didn't hurt anymore. Grandpa just began to narrate. I told the story of the matter. Ask the man. It can be known that there was once an old Taoist priest here. I don't want the man to say. If I'm not mistaken, you should be looking for my master. It's a pity. 3 years ago, he has returned to heaven. Since the master has explained it before his death, you come to him. Then if the eldest brother believes me, I'll go and see. You don't think it's going to work? Grandpa listened. People died. What else can be done about this? It can only be a dead horse saber and a live horse doctor. Immediately nodded repeatedly. I'm afraid this person will wait a while. He couldn't find it either. The man asked about his aunt's birthday. He took out the compass and pinched the paper and calculated. Said to my grandfather, "If nothing else, you little daughter, I'm afraid I won't survive this month's mistakes." The family had been admonished 9 years ago. I didn't expect you to believe it. On the contrary, it is also. Grandpa listened, immediately knelt down for the man, crying bitterly. None of us thought of it back then. That's sealed. No. What the Taoist said was true. You see. What can I do? Everything may be predestined. The man lifted his grandfather up. He muttered to himself, "Alas. That's it. That's it. You wait a minute." Soon, the man came out of the side room, dressed in a gold silk and silver-threaded robe, wearing a gossip hat, petal-white gossip shoes, also carried a gossip belt. Said to my grandfather, "Take me to your house. The sooner the better. If you could go now. Let's go." Grandpa looked at the man dressed as a Taoist priest. "I know that I have met someone who understands children. Hurry up and get up." The two rushed back to their grandmother's house overnight. As everyone knows, Grandpa was in a hurry. Also for the future of his legs. Something went wrong. Since then, I have been a little lame when I walk. If you want to say that it is fair, it is also a good labor force in the village. But at the moment there is a leg and foot injury. The Taoist priest spoke eagerly. I can only grit my teeth and persevere. This man is later Zawinbin, who has formed an indissoluble bond with our family. Zawinbin that year. He has a son and a daughter. It's a dragon and phoenix fetus. Live a peaceful rural life. The sun rises and the sun sets. Wait until I get to my grandmother's house. My grandfather explained the origin to my grandmother. Took Zawinbin to his aunt's room. Oddly enough, this time my uncle's little black dog. When I saw Wenbin, I was very kind, scattering flowers and hugging his legs. To know. This dog is usually very fierce at hurting people. It is said that even my dad was almost bitten by him. Wenbin touched the little black dog's head, laughing and going in, and let the others be thick on the outside. After the time of a stick of incense, Zawinbin came out. The complexion is a little heavy. Grandma asked nervously, "Newspaper chief, how is the situation?" Zawinbin didn't say anything. Just asked Grandma to prepare a table and put it outside the door. How dare Grandma stay full? I quickly went to move a small table, resting at the door. Then Zawinbin asked his grandmother to prepare a poured meal. Filling a bowl with rice is filled. Pour it out whole after pressing firmly. Let the rice take on the shape of a bowl. Then turn the rice upside down in a bowl. Keep the rice bowl facing up. And it must be half-baked rice. After the case is set, in the middle, there is a bowl of upside-down rice. The man took out 3 boxes from the bag. A dozen rune papers, a box of cinnabar, and a brush. I asked my grandfather to put my aunt's bed, lift it to a position directly facing the door, and let my grandfather tie up my aunt with hemp rope. Let's talk about my aunt at that time. Ever since the soldiers went in, it's been fighting. Even my grandfather, an adult man, could barely hold him down. It was as powerful as an ox overnight. Listen to the word of the Taoist priest. My grandfather tied my aunt with hemp rope. I found out later. This hemp rope is not only to keep the ant from moving. I'm afraid it's more of a soul-locking effect. That is, to tie up the soul of the ant. Don't let her out of her body. After tying up my aunt, instead, he took something that looked like a black stone, stuffed into my aunt's mouth. Said to prevent. Later, she bit her tongue and killed herself. After all that, Instead, he respectfully lit 3 sticks of incense. That kind of incense is more ordinary than the one we see. Be long and thick. The color is yellowish. It may be the legendary tribute incense. It's strange to say, there's no wind in this house. But the cigarette that is lit out of the cigarette. But it is made up of 3 strands into 1 strand. Then he slowly floated to his aunt's room. Then when Bing took out a wild goose. My grandfather was a calligrapher. As soon as I saw the wild goose, I knew that it was not an ordinary wild goose. It was a white copper cartridge goose platform, shaped like a gossip. It's just that the middle part of this wild goose platform is red. Unlike ordinary wild goose platforms, which are black. I glanced at my uncle, touched her head, said to her with a smile, "Little dolls, you go pee some. Put it in a bowl and pick it up. Bring it in and give it to me." He led his brother-in-law out. Soon, my brother-in-law's urine was brought in. The Taoist priest poured a little urine, entered the banquet table, then put that box of cinnabar, put it on the banquet table. After stirring, pick up the brush, start drawing the symbols on the rune paper. When drawing a talisman, the pen does not leave the paper. It's all in one stroke. A total of 8 runes were drawn. Then they were posted in the 8 directions of the aunt's room. It's strange to say, when the last talisman is finished, the ant on the bed actually let out a frightened roar. It's just that there's something stuffed in the mouth. I couldn't hear what it was. Her eyes widened, shaking his head uneasily. It's like I'm scared. It was like being angry again. When Bing didn't even look at it, a glance at the struggling ant. Instead, he walked briskly past, pedaled the 7-star steps, draw a sigil with each step. Then the fingers sticked. I don't know how I got it. And the rune paper burst into flames. Then the mouth began to chant the mantra. The ant on the bed began to struggle with Bin's wrinkles and runes. A little girl who was only 9 years old. It seemed like he was about to break free from the finger-thick hemp rope. Even the bedboards rattled. His face turned pale to light. The mouth kept making sounds. I couldn't hear what it was. After burning a total of 77 and 49 runes, Auntie's strength seems to have run out. Only loud panting remained. It's just that the look on Bing's face became more and more solemn. Gradually, I started to sweat. The last talisman was already sweating after it was burned. Instead, he sat on the floor. I drank a cup of tea from my grandmother. He looked very tired. He sat for about 3 minutes. Before he stood up, he looks very weak. Beckoning to my grandfather, whispered, "Don't leave any more people in the house. I'll go to the door. I have something to say to you." In the kitchen of my grandmother's house, the family looked at the exhausted Taoist priest. They all asked how it was. Bin looked at the family full of anticipation in front of him and shook his head and said, "I'm afraid I'm in trouble today." Grandma heard her say this, plop down and kneel. Then, the third aunt and brother-in-law also knelt down. Grandma cried and begged Bin, "Tao Chief, back then, we didn't know what we could see. Chase away your master. Don't blame us. Save my daughter. The doctors have already announced that they are calling the family to prepare for the future. We can't do anything else. For now, we can only count on you to save him. Our Su family has given people a coffin for a lifetime, never cut off the wood, nor did he overcharge. Meet poor people who can't afford it. I also sent a thin-skinned coffin to the past. It is also a lot of virtue. Why is it so miserable?" Wenbin hurriedly pulled up his grandmother and said, "Sister-in-law, I understand the matter of tutors very well. She's a very eccentric person. Don't talk about you. Sometimes I don't understand either. I don't blame you guys. It's just that. Your daughter's birthday. It's the reversal of yin and yang. There was a knot in the year. Plus, when passing by the reservoir that night, this little girl lacks water in the 5 elements. I just happened to be met by a little ghost. According to my calculations, it should be the 15th day of this month. Today is 14. Now the imp is still in the room. It's just that I temporarily tied the soul of the female doll with a rope, and he sealed the exit of the house with a talisman. I guess the imp is still waiting to snatch the soul." Grandma was terrified when she heard this. Imp hooks. I've heard it from the mouths of some old people before, but now it happened to his daughter. To say that you are not afraid is false. He had the courage to ask Wenbin. There are a couple of imps. Wenbin stretched out 2 fingers. 2. 1 man and 1 woman. It was made by 2 children. As soon as this word came out, my grandfather's family has a little eyebrow in their hearts. In the early years, there were 2 children in that reservoir who were touching screws, accidentally fell into the reservoir, drowned. Later, the adults in the village never let the children in the family go to that reservoir again. It was not until later that the reservoir was renovated. My cousin took me there to play. Wenbin continued, the 2 children died in vain. So I've always wanted to pull 2 pads. Maybe it's the 30th day of the month in your village. Something will happen. And it's a boy. Grandma asked, is there a way? There is a way, but... Grandma thought she wanted some money. I immediately took out a few big solidarities at home. It was handed to Wenbin, but Wenbin waved his hand and said, "Hi, sister-in-law. You go and prepare the red and green materials, then get some food." This material, Grandma's house does. The third aunt usually likes to cut paper. So, after a while, there was red and green paper. A table was laid out. Wenbin said to the third aunt, "You're holding scissors. Cut 2 sets of clothes out, 1 set of red and 1 set of green. It's the size that a child wears. Looks casual, as long as it's like clothes." We'll see you in the next episode.